Good morning. We look today at Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 23. And this starts out with, at that time, Jesus and his disciples went through the grain field on the Sabbath. And so often, when we see that word on the Sabbath, you just know that something's going to happen. And we're familiar with this story too. But, his disciples were hungry, so they began to pick some heads of grain out of the field and to chew on the grain and to eat it. And the Pharisees saw that. What are these Pharisees? They got spies out there all the time watching Jesus? That's the way it seems. He was under their vision all the time. It didn't matter what he did. They were watching. And, we've already read that, they were out to find anything and everything they could against Jesus because of these things he did, like, to eat this grain on the Sabbath. It was breaking the law. And it was, just so many things that Jesus couldn't do. It was under the microscope all of the time. So the Pharisees see that and they say to Jesus, why are your disciples breaking the law? It's just not legal to take that head of grain and to thresh it out in your hands. That's a lot of work. If you've ever done it, it's not very much work. But it's, the technicals. The Pharisees were so caught up on the technicalities of everything that they couldn't see the realities. And we're going to find that as we look a little bit more at what today's lesson is. And so Jesus responds to them. Haven't you read about what David and his companions did when they were hungry? They went into the temple and they ate the bread of the presence. And this bread of the presence, it was, like 12 loaves of bread that were there, as a symbol of the communion between the people and God. And it was only for the Pharisees to eat. It was special, whatever. And, but they, David and his soldiers ate that because they were famished. And then Jesus says this. He says, have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath, the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and yet are guiltless? This bread of the presence, probably originally hadn't been intended for the priests, but they ate it. And, the priests so often seemed to feel that they were a little bit above the law of the regular people. And then I love verse 6. I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. Something greater than the temple. Our church buildings, that's not what it's all about. What it's all about is that God cares about people. And that, we are to serve God. We are to revere God. We are to honor God. We are to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. But yet, we don't worship the church building. We don't worship the communion elements. We don't worship the altar or the pew. We worship God. So something greater than the temple is going on here. Something greater than these interpretations of law that, you condemn people for. And then, he says, if you knew what I desire mercy and not sacrifice means, you would understand more. And this, God had said that. Your offerings to me are stench in my nostrils. He was fed up with this, lip service that they were paying with, not being sincere. And then Jesus says, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And again, he's, basically referring to himself as God here when he says that the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, because, God is the Lord of the Sabbath. And then, he left that place. So they evidently had this conversation out in this grain field. And, like I said, they're watching him, his every step, his every move. And then he enters their synagogue. And I love that, their synagogue. Jesus was traveling around to different towns, different communities. So he enters the synagogue that these priests are serving, these priests that caught him out and questioned him on this. And there was a man there with a withered hand. And So he asks that question, is it law to heal on the Sabbath? And gets no response. And then he uses the illustration of, if one of your sheep falls into a well or gets into trouble, you would rescue it, right? And well, they pretty much agreed with that. Well, yeah, something like that, an accident or, those things we can deal with. But for Jesus to heal this man on the Sabbath, where this was a chronic condition, this wasn't something that just came up. He hadn't just fallen and broken his arm and Jesus healed his arm. Well, that wouldn't have been right either, because that wouldn't be any big deal. He can wait till tomorrow with that. But, it seemed like, something accidental, unintentional, something that just came about, they would bend their ways for. But for Jesus to heal someone, for Jesus to do good for someone that needed this good, was against what they would have him do. But he healed it. He said, he used their reasoning of, if they could legally rescue this sheep, well, why couldn't he legally, heal this man? And again here, the verse 14, I've got circled, the Pharisees went out and conspired against him how to destroy him. They just, he was angering them. He was doing things that were just not kosher. They couldn't accept that. And then when, verse 15, I've got circled as well. When Jesus understood what the Pharisees were thinking about it, he departed. And depending on the translation you're reading, it might say many followed him or many crowds followed him. And he cured all of them. This is still on the Sabbath. So he's just, he's a rebel in so many ways. But yet he's here doing God's work without all of the sneaky and sticky stipulations of the qualifications that get put on. Some of the qualifications of the Sabbath, as in this not working or stuff. They couldn't walk more than a certain distance. If your brother-in-law's house was 500 feet away and you could only travel 400, you couldn't go visit your brother-in-law that day. This is how silly some of this stuff was. It was because, you might be working if you walked too far. But, and Jesus quotes from Isaiah, and then verse 22, they brought to him a demoniac who was blind and mute. And as we read this, it sounds like this is still on this Sabbath day. And, Jesus is already in hot water for, healing the man's hand, for healing and curing all of these people in the crowds that followed him. And then they bring this person with demons that make him mute and blind. And he cures him. And the crowds were amazed, and they asked, they wondered, can this be the Son of David? Can this be the Messiah? Why would they have to question it? It's one of those things that, and maybe there were other miracle workers that went out and about and did things. We can read things like that in the Bible, that there were others. And, even in the Old Testament, like some of the magicians could make their staff turn into a snake or whatever. But, when you really look at Jesus and everything that Jesus did, you have to almost agree with C.S. Lewis. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was an atheist, and he became a Christian, and he wrote many Christian books, and one of the things he wrote are the Chronicles of Narnia, so that his children would be introduced to this Jesus as, a great book. Anyway, what C.S. Lewis says about Jesus, he's either crazy, he's a liar, or he is the Son of God. I don't know if that's quite the exact quote, but he's either a lunatic, liar, or the Son of God. I think those were the right words that he used. But, so they wonder, can he be the Son of David? Can he be the Messiah? With everything that he's doing. And when he says, I am the Lord of the Sabbath, but he doesn't really come out and say to them, I am the Messiah. I am the Son of God. And it's one of those things that, this question is where we end our reading today. Can this be the Son of David? And I just mentioned it yesterday or the day before, but, we need to say for ourselves that Jesus is my Lord. And so to ask that question, can this be the Son of David? Is Jesus the Messiah? Do I believe in Jesus as the Son of God? And we see what he did. And again, it's just like, C.S. Lewis came to realize that, he's got to be. You look at all the evidence. You look at everything that Jesus did and how he treated people, how he welcomed people, how he spoke and how he taught. How can we come up with any other answer to that question? Can he be the Son of David? Can he be the Messiah? Yes.